What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to another Monster Hunter video. In today's video, we are going to be watching we're going to be reacting to a video that is made by Jacob / Monster Hunter. I will have his name in this particular video in the description. The title is "Why Your Favorite Monster Is Not Returning in Monster Hunter Wilds." This title just intrigued me, and we're going to dive on into this video.
When implementing a monster into a new Monster Hunter title, there are many considerations. Unfortunately, monster popularity and how cool the monster is likely not the main consideration.
I don't know. I mean, Zinogre's been in like every single Monster Hunter game. Like everything. And even in the mobile one that just came out. And Zinogre has been voted the #1 popular monster in like every title.
The more important factors are gameplay balance, game progression, and above all else, can the monster even function in the game?
Yeah, now that is important. That's why Gameth would be so fitting to this game.
I'd like to briefly discuss this process and maybe provide possible theories on the development choices Capcom takes when selecting returning monsters for Monster Hunter. Okay. First, I should mention, Capcom has made it clear that they will continue to bring back returning monsters for their new titles.
And I think that's a good thing. I mean, it's nice to bring in these older generation monsters just because it's kind of nostalgic. Obviously, we like, new monsters to come out. That's why things like Gossarag were really cool in Sunbreak. But it was just cool to also see someone like Gore also in Sunbreak for the exact same reason.
Their track record, more often than not, is a mix of new and returning monsters for each new title. This is part of their marketing strategy. Showing Rathalos in the Monster Hunter Wilds trailer reminds the audience that this is a Monster Hunter game.
Yep,
showing
it's familiar.
Anjanath in the Monster Hunter Rise trailers, that helps bring in the Monster Hunter World player base.
Yep.
This is part of the series' identity as well, and a huge number of fans would be upset if they didn't bring back at least some returners,
It's very true.
returners. It is expected. Furthermore, it's easier on the dev team to bring back a selection of returning monsters to help buff up the amount of content without requiring development of several more brand new monsters.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, could you imagine playing a game with like a whole new set of monsters, like not one old one? I mean, it would kind of be like playing Wild Hearts. Not Wild Hearts itself, because Wild Hearts kind of sucked. But you just have to get familiar with these new things. I guess it's not a bad thing, but just bringing in the old ones, it's just a staple to how the game works.
Want to add, it's just easier on the team to make a couple, bring back a couple. My main theory as to how returning monsters are chosen for each new title is pretty simple. When the developers are developing the game, several new monster concepts are produced to completion. However, after all these new monster concepts are developed and implemented into the game, there may be holes in the game progression and the game balance. And that's when the devs go back and they look through their catalog and they're like, okay, which older monster can we fit into this hole so that the game feels full? As an example...
Yeah, and they do things like, they don't show you all the monsters that they're bringing back, which is good because it's always nice to just be surprised by an older monster.
Let's look at the monsters Levasioth and Uragan and why they were added to Monster Hunter World as opposed to some more popular volcanic monsters like Ignactor. Now, these quotes are from the Monster Hunter World official complete works. The director, Tokuda-san, says, "The Elder's Recess is an advanced field aimed at experienced players who made it late into the game. We wanted it to be an Elder Dragon map. We felt it would be too difficult if the only monsters were Elder Dragons, so we added original monsters like Dodogama, Levasioth, and Uragan. We developed the map by connecting areas so that they would encounter one another. While preparing for Teostra's involvement, we developed a lava area in the Elder's Recess, which in turn made us want to add another monster.
It makes sense.
It had to be a monster that would be just below an Elder Dragon in terms of difficulty and continue to pull the player into the local ecology. Levasioth was perfect for both requirements, but hasn't been very popular with the players. We're not sure if that's because Levasioth isn't a big part of the main story. Kashela Diora takes
the hunt alone's kind of just boring. It's like the other, it's like Geratodus. It's like a lava Geratodus. It's just a boring hunt.
High ground in Teostra has the low ground in the Elder's Recess, but we needed a monster that could link these areas. So we like the idea of a monster that lives in the upper stratum, but travels down below when it needs to eat ore. We also wanted to introduce the sleep status effect, and Uragan checked all those boxes.
Doesn't that make sense?
It's intentional that Uragan is a monster who travels on the ground and doesn't take to the air. Uragan's role here is actually quite similar to how Kulu Yaku links Geratodus and the other Wild Spire Waste monsters. But since this is the Elder's Recess, it's on a whole different power scale.
And I get it. I mean, you look at Uragan, I mean, the monster itself is very simple. The fight's simple. It's boring. I mean, just like they said here, just like Hulu, a very simple monster. Just kind of gets you warmed up to where you're at. It's a good, like,
the director
practice
also
monster.
said this about Uragan when talking about Radobon and the Rotten Veil. The Rotten Veil itself has hellish imagery going for it, so I wanted the Radobon to be kind of like that fire wheel yokai that gets around by rolling. We already had the Uragan in their library of monster designs, so it felt realistic to have Radobon be a closely related but evolutionarily different relative in the new world. At first, we weren't even planning on having Uragan make an appearance in Monster Hunter World, so it's all thanks to the development of Radobon.
That makes sense. So, I mean, that makes me believe that we're going to have more spiders in Monster Hunter Wilds. That means I feel like Gammoth fits Monster Hunter Wilds really good, and so on and so forth. Just monsters that are already in the game, but they bring back the ones that kind of look like it. I mean, it's a lot easier, like he just said, for the development of the game. Like they just showed, I can't remember the new monster's name, but it looks like Gossarag. Maybe Gossarag will be in the game. I don't know.
So as we can see from all those quotes, they don't necessarily add monsters just because they are cool or popular. Uragan's inclusion was because there was a hole that needed to be filled for the Elder's Recess, an intermediate fight to prep the player for the Elder Dragons. And due to the development already made on Radobon as a monster, it became very easy for them to just implement Uragan because it's
like the same thing.
We can assume that Levasioth and Geratodus likely had a similar development relationship as well. We should also be aware that the simulated fantasy ecosystems have an impact on which monsters are added. When they design a map, they decide which monsters are the best fit for those maps, and sometimes a returning monster is exactly what they need. When discussing Diablos in Monster Hunter World, the director said this: "We could have created a new monster, but when considering what both new and old players should encounter as the Master of the Sands, there wasn't a better option than Diablos. Diablos have always had a heavy charge attack that's tough to dodge. We kept those aspects, but balanced it out with the effectiveness of sound."
And every time I see Diablos, it makes me think that they can also add Monoblos as well.
Sound traps and how you use Diablos to defeat other monsters. On that same topic of Diablos, Executive Director Fujioka said, "Depending on the situation, you might bump into a Rathalos butting heads with another monster, but Diablos is a monster that doesn't leave its territory. This forces the player to pull Diablos out of its cave to use it as a trap for other monsters."
And this is probably why they added Black Diablos as well, because it's not the same monster in terms of like movesets, but it's like the same design.
You can still use it like Rathalos, but I wanted there to be a clear difference. I think I might have caused some problems for the development team coming up with a massive quicksand hazard, but I was inspired by Tokuda's request for a terrain effect on par of the Ancient Forest's waterfall hazard. The dynamic factor of Diablos appearing combines with everything else to make a really enjoyable experience. As we know with Monster Hunter Wilds, we have a desert map, and that desert map has quicksand hazards just like the Wildspire Waste.
Yeah, so you would just assume that they would bring in Diablos, but maybe, like I said, maybe they put a twist on it, and maybe they put in Monoblos, just because it's one of those monsters that you haven't seen in a very long time. I mean, you saw it in Monster Hunter Stories 2, but, you know, a lot of people didn't really play that.
But it seems that the developers this time don't want Diablos. They want to have a new monster that rules the sands. So gameplay mechanic-wise, the Balahara and the Rei Dao are seemingly taking the place of Diablos, And this is where my main talking point of this video comes in. Is Diablos being replaced in this title with these new monsters? Or will Diablos still be in the game in
I don't think so. I think we will see Diablos.
some capacity somehow? And how does that make us, the fans, feel? So on one hand, I see why some players would want to fight something new in a desert. These new monsters look great, and we've been fighting Diablos in the desert every single game.
Forever.
But I'm sure other players will be quite sad to hear that their favorite desert wyvern is not coming back to this newest Monster Hunter title, and this newest Monster Hunter title happens to have the most mechanically complex desert ecosystem ever seen in Monster Hunter yet. And
So it would only make sense to see Diablos.
of course, there are players that are fans of Monoblos. And Monoblos hasn't come back since Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. Even if
Actually, Monster Hunter Stories too. Like I said, people don't really play it, but
they brought back Monoblos for Wilds, there will be many players wondering why Monoblos instead of Diablos, or why Diablos instead of Monoblos. And I think that kind of answers
I think they should have both.
this question of, will Monoblos ever return? I think that the truth is, there might not even be a place for Monoblos in the future of Monster Hunter. Whether we like it or not, some monsters simply struggle to find themselves returning for some reason or another.
Yeah.
They get replaced by another monster that fulfills the same role.
Or they just can't fit into the game, like Legiacris, or just some of the really large Elder Dragons, just because they can't put them in those
When
games.
Horrible Third was developed, the developers decided to not include the underwater mechanics from Monster Hunter Tri, and unfortunately that meant
I don't like that idea. We need it back.
that Legiacris was shelved for that game. Because Legiacris was absent from Portable Third, the game was now lacking a Thunder Element monster. Luckily, of course, the new flagship, Zynogur, took that mantle and became the game's main Thunder Element monster.
And then, like I said, you see Zynogur in every single game from this point on. Even the mobile game.
From the very beginning of
Even
Monster Hunter World's
other
development,
portable
the dev
games.
team wanted Legiacris in the game. But in the end, he's not the main Thunder monster that we got in that game. We got Tobi Gadachi instead. Zynogur did end up in Monster Hunter World through Iceborne, but we didn't see Legiacris. And this is probably because Zynogur is just an easier monster to bring back for future titles compared to
And it's also, like I said, one of the most popular monsters.
Legiacris. And also,
It's
whether you
always
like it
at
or
least
not,
top 3.
Zynogur is the more popular monster. This is an objective fact now.
It
I gotta
is.
say this again so I'm not accused of this. I do not advocate for any monster to be left behind. I would obviously be very happy if any classic monster returns in a future title. I
I honestly think if Legiacris isn't in the game, I think a lot of people are going to go crazy.
prefer a lot of the classic monsters over the newer monsters. A lot of my favorites are classic monsters. I would love to see a lot of these classic monsters come back for a game like Wilds, because the game is just so advanced and interesting. I'd love to see those old monsters in these new mechanics, but I think it's better for us to make critical assumptions about what
And, you know, as he's fighting Lala Burina here, it would only make sense that they bring in more spiders again. At least one more.
is actually going to happen. Like, to be honest, an old, outdated first-gen monster like Yankaku would never be brought back into a game like Monster Hunter Wilds.
And here we are.
So, I originally wrote this video script before they announced this at Tokyo Game Show, and the numerous ramblings in the video were written about how, like, Anjanath had effectively replaced Yankaku in terms of role and game progression, and I really did think that Anjanath was gonna be added into the game. I was wrong. Completely wrong. Yankaku is in Monster Hunter Wilds, and it's the first returning monster to be properly announced aside from the Rathalos tease in the first teaser. And I'm gonna be honest, seeing Yankaku in a flock is
pretty awesome.
The absolute dream of the.
It's pretty awesome, and you know, this is the cool thing about these games, right? Like, it's very unpredictable, right? You can't like foresee what they're gonna bring to the game, right? You can guess all you want, and you can have your predictions. You can say, oh, maybe I want this monster, maybe I don't want this monster. But ultimately, when they do things like this, it's just nostalgic. It's just, you know, and everyone enjoys it.
Childhood. There's like 13 Yen Kutku in this frame alone. Remember in the Monster Hunter 1 opening cinematic when we see like the flock of Rathian and Rathalos? Like, it's everything. This game is truly the game of all time. So in a recent interview at Tokyo Game Show with director Tokuda-san, regarding Yen Kutku's inclusion, he actually said something very important that was in line with this video. And this is a poor translation, and so we shouldn't take these words exactly.
Just like Corpeko, I think it'd be really, really cool to see Corpeko and Deviljho in this game.
Exactly as they are, but he essentially said,
and seeing Yen in here makes me believe that that could be a possibility.
Yen Kutku is a very important character to us, and he has been working hard as a synonym for Monster Hunter since the original series. Until now, we've been reintroducing him when the timing was right, but it's getting more and more difficult. When we create a new world view, monsters with the same position as Yen Kutku will naturally appear, and the gameplay and impression of the different types of monsters will inevitably overlap. If that's the case, we thought there was no need to force him to appear, so we decided to hold off on his reintroduction.
That makes sense.
So what I've personally gathered from this is essentially that Capcom believes that Yen Kutku is an important monster in the series, and that they would prefer if he does actually appear in these games when possible. However, because other monsters tend to fulfill the same role
to put him in
as Yen Kutku, he is sometimes put on the sideline.
Yeah, I mean, you have like Aknasam, you have Lagombi, like you have all these type of monsters that are your smaller, large monsters, and they're the ones that you just kind of practice on for the most part. So that makes sense.
In this case, there was a position in Wilds for Yen Kutku to fill, and thus he's been reintroduced into this game.
And again, this is exactly why I think Corpeko is going to make an appearance too.
While I was actually worried that Yen Kutku was being systematically replaced by Puke and Anjanath, as these two newer monsters fulfilled the same niches or roles.
They do.
And they were more up to date for the current gameplay systems and, current Monster Hunter titles, and they were becoming more popular monsters than Yen Kutku ever was.
They were, yeah.
And if they somehow became popular enough, then Yen Kutku would be forever sidelined. And truthfully, no one at Capcom has ever said Anjanath is the new Yen Kutku and will replace the monster. Nor was that intended or anticipated by the team. I don't even think it's a thought that the team has ever actually had. But I'm arguing, in the case of Monster Hunter World, Anjanath coincidentally fulfills the same role that Yen Kutku did in Monster Hunter 1. And because of how successfully Anjanath did this, I have made the critical assumption that Anjanath will likely return in future titles. If you ask any player who was around to play the original
Of course, absolutely, that's going to happen. Absolutely.
Monster Hunter 1, then there's a high chance that they will describe Yen Kutku as the first wall in the game. It's the monster that prepares the player for what every other monster to follow will be like.
Yep. Yeah, you have your warm-up monsters, like your very, very easy ones, right? We're talking about like, God, I forgot its name. It's the blue one with the flash in its lights. It's one of the easiest monsters in the game, right? And then you start to get up a little bit further in the game. You have like your Great Jaggies and your Jagresses and stuff like that you just kind of walk through. And then, speaking in terms of Monster Hunter World, you had Anjanath, who was a great in-between monster, who was faster, stronger, and had more health than, a Jagress, but it's not going to have the same health as something like a Olatreon or something like that. But it's a good way to just kind of prep you for what's about to destroy you, actually.
I had my guard up. And it is a jump in difficulty.
I've actually never seen that before. Force exhausted. So this is Monster Hunter 1 instead of saying, when you get destroyed, it says force exhausted. Huh? Interesting. Instead of fainted or
the Velocitron and Gendro. Yankaku teaches the player the basic moveset of the Wyvern skeleton, which the majority of the monsters in Monster Hunter 1 use. It also introduces the player to the fire element, which is a forewarning that the future fire monsters will probably hit much harder. And if the player crafts the Yankaku armor, they may have a better chance of survival against those harder-hitting fire monsters. It's been 20 years since Monster Hunter 1, so the systems of gameplay are far more complex now. Now we have multiple different monster skeletons that all the different Monster Hunter types utilize, and many different monsters actively teach the player about different mechanics. It's not all just on Yankaku anymore. But like Yankaku, Anjanath is often described as the first wall in Monster Hunter World. He's also the first fire element monster you are tasked to hunt in World, just like Yankaku in 1. And Anjanath is important in preparing the player for future Brute Wyvern fights in the game, like Devil Joe and then in the expansion, Glavenus. Director Tokuda-san said this about Anjanath. We wanted a monster
I would like to see Glavenus in Wilds too.
That could introduce intermediate game.
And I already talked about that because we have the new chicken monster who has the little fire tail like Glavenus. So, I mean, it's just like the same thing in the conversation before, right? They're like basically the same monster. So why wouldn't you just add it in the game? It's
gameplay by having it be strong against weapons across the board. We wanted it to force the player to guard, evade, and use recovery items, teaching them about the essentials of action-oriented success and failure. We wanted to give it a trait of smelling the player that would allow it to root out players who were trying to hide from it too. Anjanath is part of the gradual progression through Monster Hunter World and ultimately acts as the player's exam into intermediate gameplay.
It's like
and
a buffer.
The player should expect the rest of the game to get progressively harder. Anjanath's armor is also pretty decent for that point in the game, a lot like Yankaku. So it isn't just the fact that they're both bird related and they're both pink. They actually serve a very similar role in their respective game. But like I said before, the gameplay systems have changed quite a bit.
A lot.
There still could be a potential place for Yankaku in any Monster Hunter title. However, the combat has changed so much and the monster variety has increased. Yankaku isn't really on the same level as Anjanath anymore. Yankaku would probably serve more or less the same role as Puke now. Just another beginner level monster.
Just something you just kind of walk through just so you can get used to just hunting.
Not the gatekeeper into intermediate difficulty monsters. And almost every new Monster Hunter title introduces multiple new starter level monsters like Puke or Yankaku. Thus, Yankaku just, on average, has a much lower chance of returning at all. And the other newer bird wyverns developed over the last few generations are a better fit for the radically different combat gameplay compared to Monster Hunter 1. Let's face it, Aknasom is built to fight and counter 5th gen players, but Yankaku is not. So it has us worried.
But it will be, and so will Corpeko.
Yankaku is slowly losing its place in modern Monster Hunter, and I think many other monsters are too. Thankfully, in the Tokyo Game Show interview, the team has stated that they have borrowed elements from the monster movements in Monster Hunter Rise and applied them to Yankaku and likely any other old returning monsters. So he will likely keep up with the player just fine now, which we assumed was going to happen. But really, I think having him in a flock, there being a flock of these things, all attacking you all at once, I think that that's really the edge that he needed, and it'll definitely make the fight chaotic and interesting. That won't apply to every other new monster that might be brought back.
I mean, the whole group thing just is fitting for all the smaller, larger monsters, like Great Jagras, or Great Jaggy, I guess I should say. It just makes sense that they could be in a flock, right? They're all small but large, or categorized as large monsters, but it would just make sense.
Because not every monster brought back would work well in a big herd.
And speaking of the big herds, I mean, just to see Gammoth in a herd would be crazy. Will we see it? I don't know, but it would be really cool if we did.
Almost any monster that is giant and slow-moving, such as Gravios or Gammoth, simply cannot keep up with the speed of the players and their damage output. Balancing would require either bumping their health pools up astronomically,
make them really strong,
or the monsters just wouldn't be slow anymore. They'd gain a bunch of new flashy attacks that make them faster. If the entire aesthetic of the monster's immenseness, being intimidating, is lost, then I think the monster wouldn't be the same monster anymore. I think a
Yeah.
huge reason why players even like these slow-moving giant monsters is for that
It's good
specific
practice.
aesthetic. If the monster was changed to counter the new way hunters fight, then I don't believe they would be the same Gravios or Gammoth anymore.
No, they wouldn't.
However, if you take a monster like Ignactor or Magma Almadron as potential replacements of the dangerous volcanic monster role that Gravios once dominated, these monsters will soon show you that they are faster and more intense in the way that they interact with the player hunters. And
I mean, I think just like you said, balancing it out with health or making them a little bit stronger or something like that would make a lot of sense.
this is just better suited for
Like
the
if they brought them
current
back.
way Monster Hunter's gameplay, combat gameplay is like. A fan favorite monster like Great Jaggy has a very basic moveset and really can't keep up compared to a monster like Great Azuchi or Great Macau. And even if I love Great Jaggy, these other newer monsters fulfill the role of the starting raptor boss monster.
I mean, it does, but we did see Great Jaggy in Monster Hunter Rise. I mean, just the last game. So, I mean, I'm sure we'll see it
Better
in more.
for the current player hunter movesets. So far, we haven't seen a raptor boss monster for Wilds, and I theorize it's because they simply don't fit Monster Hunter's combat anymore. The developers would rather the player learn to fight things like Chatacabra or Doshagama, as they better reflect the rest of the monster roster and the
I feel like we'll still see them.
combat experience going forward. Now, there are special
I could
cases
be wrong.
where a classic monster continues to thrive in every new generation and have yet to have a suitable replacement. For example, a monster like Baroth perfectly demonstrates an important aspect of Monster Hunter gameplay to the player. The monster itself is a strong tutorial. The Monster Hunter
It
World
is,
book that
and
I'm
it brings
quoting
in
from
different like mechanics to the game. You know, fighting like a Great Jaggy, there's no like strategy. You just kind of go in and destroy it. But someone like Baroth, you have to understand that it can cover itself in mud. You have to understand that you have to hit specific parts of the body to expose the mud or to break off the mud. And it just brings a different element of hunting.
describes Baroth as the environmental utility tutorial monster. And the director said this about him: the point of this monster's entire existence is to basically say to the player, okay, here's how you dodge a charge and then follow it up with an attack. We brought it in as soon as we came up with the Wildspire Waste. We thought expanding on Baroth would create an easy to understand tutorial experience. It's designed to be a stopping block for players so that once they learn how to deal with it, it's easy. This
Very
also
much so.
tends to apply to flagship monsters. Because so much development time is spent on making the flagship monsters real standouts in appearance and showcasing interesting combat gameplay, they tend to be prime candidates for returning and seldom get replaced by monsters of any similar niche. And of course, their popularity in the community means that any flagship's inclusion is good for marketing and engagement. Nearly all of the difficult endgame fights tend to find themselves returning over and over in newer titles. Powerhouse monsters like Deviljho and Rajang, as well as elder dragons like Teostra and Kashela Diora, will continue to return in games because they continue to fulfill their roles as difficult endgame fights that thematically represent
Makes
the
a lot of
final
sense.
challenges for the player.
Maybe Nurg.
More quotes from the director. From the very beginning of development, we already knew two Elder Dragons we just had to use, Teostra and Kashela Diora. We felt very strongly that from an action standpoint for both old and new fans, we could refine these monsters enough to be crowd pleasers. That was our starting place for developing the lava region of the Elder's Recess. It also fits our story in a believable way as the basis for the Everstream. Both gameplay and setting combine to help make Teostra a standout monster. Just like Teostra, Kashela Diora is an Elder Dragon that we simply couldn't leave out of a place like the New World with all of its Elder Dragons. The leader of the graphics team did such a bang-up job on these two that I was dead set on coming up with gameplay that matched how great they looked. As a result of that, we have players who like or dislike certain Elder Dragons for reasons that are unique and varied. I think maintaining a balance of challenging play with a variety of playstyles makes for a highly polished product. So as we can see, this is why we tend to see the same dozen monsters returning every title, because they continue to prove themselves as working. They hold up to the updated
And they just fit the roles.
systems. They don't have any alternatives that are there to fill their role, and they are popular with a large portion of the community. Furthermore, Capcom is willing to update and improve a classic monster so that they can continue to fulfill their role even in the new title with updated gameplay. They try to do this for Rathalos and Rathian because they are the face of the franchise and they need those updates.
They
But
do.
we must understand that not every monster will receive this treatment, or that they could even handle these updates and still be the same monster that we know and love.
Yep.
The giant siege monsters like Lao Shanlung, Jen Moran, and Zora Magdaros are effectively an evolution of the same hunting concept.
Yeah, they're like long, boring fights.
You have a large monster that is so big the player hunter can physically stand on it. And because it's so big, it requires large, heavy artillery to bring it down. And finally, there is a gimmick where if it deals enough damage to the artillery or the base the player is defending, the quest is ended in a failure. It's the exact same quest, just a different monster. These monsters typically don't return in subsequent titles, but rather the fundamental concepts are reused in a way
I am okay with never having to see Zora Magdaros again. Absolutely.
that is hopefully bigger and better. It's a novel hunt after all, but it's effective for world building and being a spectacle set piece. It's important for Monster Hunter's aesthetic and storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a big theatrical moment. That's all it is.
But isn't necessarily the most fun hunt to repeat, and this is why they've made an effort to change it up every game. Shen Gaoren is an attempt to improve on the Lao Shenlong quest, just as how Jen Moran is an attempt to improve on Shen Gaoren. Many players didn't like Zora Magdaros, and we should expect to see something that improves on the concept significantly in Wilds, but we probably will not see these specific monsters return ever. So across the board, it is inevitable that several of our favorite classic monsters will end up being replaced by a monster of a similar niche or role, whether it be gameplay related or story locale aesthetic related. It's unfortunate that a monster like Cephadrome will likely never return, but many of these monsters are essentially trial and error in the process of making the best monsters for these games. If it wasn't for
I mean, I could see it being in Wilds, right? But I'm okay with it not too.
We wouldn't have Balahara, which does fill the same role and will likely be a more enjoyable fight for the new gameplay systems in Wilds. Even if I would have preferred Cephadrome, Capcom doesn't feel the same way, and I have to deal with that. All that said,
this fight alone was just annoying. I mean, the Cephadrome just does this the entire time.
I've tempered my expectations, and there is only one monster that I'm requesting and is hopeful is in the game.
Brachiosaurus.
But as I outlined in this video, a monster will only return for a reason the developers seem worthy. But if Takuda says that the reason why Kirin was brought back for World was because they wanted to see how the Kirin armor would look in high-end graphics, then really anything goes. Anything could be a worthy reason. So, come on, Capcom. Don't you want to see the PS5 level 4K RE Engine Plus graphics Kirin equipment on both genders? I know you do.
No.
Make it happen, and my life is yours.
Absolutely.
That's it, everyone. I hope this video helped adjust your expectations for Wilds. Don't get too hopeful now, but obviously never lose hope. We should try to appreciate the new monsters, even if I'm one of those boomers that really does prefer the classic monsters. I would prefer if the classic monsters were in there too.
That's funny.
That the new monsters, there's a reason why.
I think they're fantastic.
We see them
personally,
replacing old ones, and I think it's good to see a new monster sort of take an old concept and make it a lot better. I want to give a special thanks to my patrons. As I said before, there are so many of you now that I can't list you all, but without all your support, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing this. It means so much to me. I'm so happy that I have all of you. And finally, if you haven't seen my Patreon yet, I just released instructions for multiple new monsters, including Chatacabra and Lalabarina from Monster Hunter Wilds, and those are free. I actually have a lot of free instructions on there, so if that hobby interests you, please check it out. Link below. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Cool. All right, make sure you guys sub. Make sure you like the video. Again, video was from Jacob, and I do have this listed in the description below. Thank you guys for watching.